So now that we got this forward, backward navigation working and we can view our meal details, it's time to add another very important navigation pattern to this app. A pattern which you will likely need in many of the apps you're going to build in the future. And that pattern would be tab-based navigation, having a tab bar at the bottom which can be used to switch between different screens. That's what we're going to add here, and we're going to add it to allow users to switch between this categories screen here, where they then can dive into categories and meals, and a favorites screen where they can view all their favorite meals and then still dive into those meals, but they don't have the categories, they just have their favorite meals there. That's the idea, and that's what we're going to build here. Now for that, we first of all have to add a new screen, a new file in the screens folder. And that new screen will be called tabs. Because this tabs navigation requires its own screen, which then loads other screens as embedded screens, you could say. Now in this tabs Dart file, we therefore create a new class because we'll still have a widget. But here we have to extend stateful widget for the first time in this section, because switching between these tabs, which we'll soon add, will require us to update some state to update what's visible on the screen. Because if we switch from tab A to tab B, we of course must update the screen. So here I create a new stateful widget class, and of course we'll also create the state class that belongs to it, where we extend state that is connected to our tabs screen widget. And in this tabs screen widget, we have the create state method where we return an instance of our tabs screen state like this. And here we can change this to state of tabs screen. We will also add a constructor here, which in this case is a very simple constructor that only accepts and forwards this key. And then in the tabs screen state class down there, we of course need to add the build method, as we always do. And in this build method here, we will return a scaffold with an app bar, which is set to the app bar widget, where I want to set the title dynamically. It should always be a text widget, but the text that is displayed as a title should depend on which tab is selected. So I'll just put dynamic here and we'll replace this later. Now of course we'll also have a body, and this also will need to be set dynamically, because that will be the active screen, which will depend on which tab is selected. So here I'll just add 3 dots for now, and we're going to work on this later as well. Because now we're also going to add something new. We're going to add the bottom navigation bar parameter to the scaffold widget. Because this tab bar is such a common thing, such a common requirement in mobile apps, that it's officially supported by Flutter. The scaffold widget allows you to set a bottom navigation bar, which in the end simply is such a tab bar. Now here, bottom navigation bar wants a widget, but typically here you create a bottom navigation bar widget, and that's another widget built into Flutter. Now, bottom navigation bar is a widget that, for example, has an onTap parameter, which wants a function that will be triggered automatically whenever the user selects a tab. So whenever the user taps one of the items in this tab bar. Now for this, onTap will call a function that automatically receives an integer as a value. The index of the tab that was tapped, to be precise. So here we should provide a function that accepts this index, and again the index value will be provided by Flutter, since it will be Flutter that calls this function when the user taps one of our tabs. And then we also have to add items to this bottom navigation bar, which is a list of tabs in the end. Now a tab here is a bottom navigation bar item object, and those objects can be created with help of the built-in bottom navigation bar item class. Now every bottom navigation bar item needs an icon, and in addition you can also set a label. Now here I'll need two tabs, one for the categories screen and one for the favorites screen, which we have yet to add. Now here I'll start with the icon for the categories screen. You can of course use any icon of your choice, but here I'll build one with the built-in icon widget, because icon wants a widget, but of course it typically wants an icon widget. And the icon I want to use here with this icon widget is the set meal icon, which is built into Flutter and which looks like this. Now the label here should just be a string, and here I'll use a label of categories, because with this tab the user will go to the categories screen. Now for the second bottom navigation bar item, I'll create an icon with the star icon, which looks like this, because here we'll go to the favorites that were selected by the user. Now here we can then add const in front of this list. Since both items are const and can't change in any way, we can of course change which one was selected, but the tab widgets themselves internally don't change. And now we can set our body. And of course that body should be set dynamically based on which tab was pressed. So therefore what I'll do here in my tab's screen state class is I'll add a new variable, which is of type int, which I'll name selected page index. And initially I'll set that to 0. Now I'll have two pages, and I simply plan to work with the indexes 0 for the first page and 1 for the second page. Now with that state added, I can also add a method that can be called select page, where I get an index as an input, and where I then call set state to update my selected page index and set it to the index I get as an argument here. And it's now select page, which I'll connect to my bottom navigation bar as a value for on tab, so that whenever we tab one of these tabs, we trigger select page and we update the selected page index. Now, how is this page index useful? Well, here in the build method, we can now create a new variable, active page, which is of type widget. And by default, this could be the categories screen, like this. And we can set this to const here. But now I can check if the selected page index is 1, so if the second tab was selected, and keep in mind the second tab should lead us to the favorites, so if this index is 1, then I want to set active page to a different screen. And indeed the screen to which I want to set it is the meals screen. Now we used the meals screen before to get there from inside the categories screen. And that won't change. We will still push this meals screen from inside there. But the favorites screen can simply reuse the meals screen, because on the favorites screen I in the end just want to display a bunch of meals, and that is exactly what the meals screen does. So reusing that screen makes a lot of sense. Therefore, if the selected page index is 1, so if this second tab, this favorites tab was pressed, my active page should be the meals screen. And of course, for categories screen and meals screen to be available in this file, you have to add imports to both screens. So from the screens folder in your project, you have to import category start and meal start. But with that imported, you can set these screens as values for active page. And now for the meals screen, we also have to set the title and the meals. And the title here should be favorites, though I will come back to that a little bit later, but for the moment it's favorites. And for the meals, we of course want to show just the favorite meals of the user. Now, at the moment, we got no logic for managing favorites, and therefore for the moment, I'll just show an empty list here, like this. But this will change later. But now we have the logic for switching between two different screens, and now we can use active page, which contains one of these two screens, as a value for body. And with that, we got the logic to change the index, and based on the index, we change the screen, which we output as body here. Now we can also set this title here dynamically by adding another variable, active page title, which by default is categories, for example. But if the selected page index is 1, we can set active page title equal to favorites or your favorites. And it's now this active page title that will be output here in this text widget in the app bar as a title. And now with all these steps taken, we can go to the main Dart file and make sure that by default we don't show the categories screen, but instead the newly added tabs screen. And for that, of course, you can remove the categories screen import, but make sure that you added the tabs screen import like this. If you now save everything and force a reload, you should have some tabs at the bottom here. And by default, the first tab is selected. Now, if I click the second tab, you see that indeed I switch to the favorites screen. But you might also see that indeed the second tab is now not highlighted. It's still the first tab, which I can tap to go back, but the highlighting of the tab never changes. The reason for that is that we actually have to tell the bottom navigation bar which tab is selected. And this is done by setting another parameter. And indeed, bottom navigation bar has many parameters that can be set to configure this navigation bar exactly as you want it. But here we have to set the current index and set this to our selected page index, because this will simply control which tab will be highlighted. And we want to keep this in sync with our state, with the selected page index state. Once you made this change here, you can go back and you will see that now the tabs are selected and highlighted correctly. And that is in general how you can add tab-based navigation. But at the moment, we actually have a problem, at least a potential problem. We have two app bars here. Also, of course, on the favorites screen. And this, of course, is not ideal. So why do we have these two tab bars? Well, we have them because we have a scaffold widget here in the tabs screen. But we then also have a scaffold widget in the categories screen here, where we also add a tab bar, and in the meals screen, where we also add a tab bar. Now for the categories screen, the solution is quite straightforward. We should simply go to categories Dart and remove the scaffold there, because we are setting a title for this screen inside of the tabs screen. There we are managing this active page title, which is set as a title for the overall screen. So in categories Dart, we can remove this scaffold here with the app bar and body, and remove one closing parenthesis so that we directly return the grid view. With that here on the categories screen, we now only have one tab bar and it still works as before. So that's all good. For the favorites screen, it's more difficult. Because here we're using the meals screen and we can't just remove the scaffold widget there. Because the meals screen is also used if we dive into categories. Here we got the meals screen as well. And here we need scaffold because it is a standalone screen without tabs at the bottom. Therefore, we should conditionally use this scaffold widget. And one way of showing it conditionally would be to actually make this title optional by adding a question mark after string so that it can also be null. Then we can also remove required here so that the title does not have to be set. With that down there, we can actually add some conditional logic and check if title is null, so if it's not set, and if that's the case, we just return our content. Otherwise, we return the scaffold that uses the title, and here we can add an exclamation mark because we know that if we reach this code here and this code gets executed, title will not be null, because if it would be null, we would return here. And as you learned, once you return, any other code thereafter won't be executed. So we either return content, which is simply our list or this fallback text here, or we return the scaffold with the app bar. And now we can go back to the tabs screen, and here, when creating the meals screen, we now simply don't set the title, we just set the meals. And we can set this to const for now, but we don't set the title there, and by not setting the title, we will make sure that this scaffold inside of meals screen won't be displayed. So now if we reload, you will see that if you switch to favorites, there is only one app bar up there. And on the other hand, if we dive into a category, we still have the app bar there as well. So here we still got the scaffold.